Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It is the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of Rogue News TV featuring Veles. And you can find Veles every single day over at RogueNews.com Discord. The links are in our website, RogueNews.com. Go check it out. And with that being said, Veles, absolutely bombastic last two shows you've done. Where do you want to start today, sir?
We got a lot to cover, and I did post to Discord folks the topics I was going to cover today. We're going to the normal kind of bric-a-brac, and then we've got heavy coverage of MK Ultra and some other things. Although I don't want to say recent developments, but it's I don't want to say the economy, but so, as some of you may be aware, especially here in North America, the Dow Jones is almost off 1,000 points. I know some of you might be saying, Veles, that's my money. Yeah, it's mine too. And the NASDAQ's almost down 600. This is more V and Algo's area than mine, but I always find these events interesting because it's like, okay, we had a jobs report that's a bit off, but it also begs the question, are you financial folks in the media who report on you so jacked that the slightest positive news is you think Jerome Powell's about to lower rates, which you all seem to be just completely fixated on, and the slightest bad news means all life on this planet is going to end. And I'm adding to that because the Daily Mail's top article, as I'm speaking to you all right now, is concerns the American economy could collapse. It's like, holy shit. Talk about yellow journalism. And V, we're also on YouTube today.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as we're not talking about medical advice, we're good.
Yeah.
If you are, we'll cut the feed. Just doing a little experimentation here.
Yeah, no medical advice per se, but I don't know if MK Ultra will get lumped into that, but we'll see.
No. They had Truth Stream Media talk about it. Whitney Webb talked about it on YouTube. Yeah, MK Ultra is clear.
Okay, cool. Alrighty, so with that, my thanks to a listener of the program, Errant Apparent, for a quote, no rumor should be believed until it is officially denied. We've had a lot of that the last few weeks. Airspace, just an awareness concerning war in the Middle East, or at least more than the normal degree of regular shooting in the region. Most airlines have canceled flights into Israel, especially this weekend. Who's a bit more of a clear indication that some of the rumors may be true about what's going on with Lebanon. We'll see. PSYOP and official denial. I'm growing in my suspicion of what we're witnessing in the U.S. political theater was planned months ago. In fact, Kamala Harris may not even be aware of the following. I think they're creating what's known as a mind space in the minds of the public by running a potential woman candidate for the Democrat Party against Donald. The reason? First, to reinforce the idea in the minds of the public of a woman candidate. Second, a woman candidate who most probably cannot win. Third, to replace the woman candidate with a woman who can win, and that candidate being Hillary Clinton, who will be planted like a seed on now fertile ground. She'll be the right woman at the right time and the right savior to save us from Bad Man Orange. We'll see. Then again, to what degree does the voting public believe or even care about the presidential election at this point? California. Per a Forbes article, the state leaders of California are working on legislation which will no doubt be passed to ban diesel locomotives. They want all legacy locomotives off the tracks by 2029, and longer distance trains must have zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2035. These regulations per Forbes will ban 2/3 of the entire U.S. locomotive fleet from ever entering the state of California. If California was trying to go the route of, say, Switzerland and produce everything they need or as much of it as they can inside the state, that would be one thing. At one time, that may have actually been possible, but certainly not now. It'll be amusing to see how this turns out. In other news, I posted a link on Discord about how 12 states want to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles by around 2035. Of course, there is a little wiggle room there. You could always go out of state and buy a car and then register after you bring it back. That's a far cry from no diesel locomotives in California. The states pushing those rules are the usuals, which are California, Oregon, Washington State, the Northeast, and Virginia. And in California's case, if they want to go all electric, given their luck in building a high-speed rail line between San Francisco and LA after $8 billion, where they've only built, I think, a quarter of the track. Good luck running electric lines across the state of California to bring goods into the state. The comment about whether we see in Donald's operating style from the world of information technology and projects. In my various lines of work, we've used simulations as an approach to test out something significant before shoving it into widespread use, whether within a large corporation or a federal agency. In some cases, a certain degree of spend or risk will mandate you dry run something several times before rolling it out. In the software world, they use terms like iterations or betas, among other phrases. Iterations are progressive improvements and adjustments to software or a product before it's developed. Not just to fix any glitches or problems, but to add enhancements. Betas are software releases who are not quite ready for prime time, and they are released to a small community of users to clean up and identify those last few glitches or improvements. Likewise, I've managed quite a few proof of concept projects in my day. You run a project like it's for real and use it to test out a concept or a simulation before you make a very large investment. Proof of concept projects can be a real lifesaver. Everything to that point may look like it will work, and then as you run a proof of concept effort, you'll find something or somewhere in your planning was missed and it's significant. So where am I going with this? Political candidates come and go in American politics, and that both political parties use the same tired approach to every election because, in fact, we're dealing with a uniparty, at least at the national level, with some outliers like Ron and Rand Paul or Jim Traficant, and even they are a rare breed. If you look at Donald over many years, you'll see he's been incrementally working his candidacy and his approach to government. Said another way, he's been iteratively improving his approach and himself. Let me qualify my use of the word improving. I don't mean necessarily for the good of the country, but more in terms of his effectiveness. Everyone forgets prior to 2016, he had run a dry run campaign. He never thought he would win, but it taught him immense amounts of information about effectiveness in national campaigns and what approaches to use to get through the bureaucracy. And that it's that line from Apocalypse Now. Every day Charlie squats in the bush, he's getting stronger, and every day I'm here getting weaker. I think that's one of the most critical differences between him and other politicians. He keeps learning and adjusting his planning and improving what he's doing. Donald, unlike traditional politicians, is not fixated on getting elected or solely elected. That's the lifestyle of a parasite. He thinks like an elite, even if he's only marginally won. He plans for the long term, he adjusts, he coordinates, he negotiates. These are foreign ideas to traditional politicians. Politicians are used by others to manipulate the political process to gain what they want. Donald Trump and those backing him is injecting himself into the political process to achieve different things. That's very different. I'm not discussing this in terms of effectiveness as a political candidate. I'm talking about his ability to throw a lot of elite plans into chaos. To quote from Dune, the power to destroy a thing is the power to control a thing. Importantly, this is not about savior dynamics with people like him, aka we need a savior to save us all, or this election will fix everything. If you can disrupt someone's plans, and he's done it many times over his life, that's just a poker chip, and they'll pay you a lot of money not to disturb that chip or some other concession. The mechanics of it all are very fascinating if it wasn't so serious. Olympic opening ceremonies. Before I get into Chan Thomas and the Adam and Eve story, a little bit of related topic matter concerning the Olympics. First, when it comes to a lot of hidden astrology in our modern world, Micah Dank's programs on YouTube is a good place to review. There's a lot of people in this space, and my thanks as always to Cool Cat for some of the folks he sent my way to review. Frank had on his Quite Frankly program last Monday a guest named Ryan Gable. Ryan's website is The Secret aching.info, all one word. There was a ton of detail in that program, and if you have an interest, I recommend finding Frank's program from Monday, July 29th on www.quitefrankly.tv. I cannot do Ryan's comments justice on today's program, and I'd love to get him and Micah Dank together sometime somewhere on somebody's program. What I will say is the opening ceremonies are the classic hidden within the public space. For some, the ceremonies were just silly French-style entertainment at the opening of the Olympics. For others, it was dark overtones and borderline satanic imagery. Both of those views are incorrect, especially with anything dealing with the world's elites. From the silver horse not being the horse of the apocalypse, because that horse is green, but instead a moon analogy. The blue figure being a reference to Hindu beliefs of Gnosis and wisdom. The French government's admission the symbolism of the French kids on the Seine River and the tunnel was done on purpose. The net of this is it's loaded with ancient imagery from belief systems of the oldest known societies in our history, like the Indus Valley of modern India, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, and even the Mayans. The entire opening ceremony was symbolic of the sacred feminine, rebirth, passage of one era into another, and astrology. Ryan even drew analogies to recent statements made by certain politicians. Case in point, Joe Biden's constant references to he's passing the torch to a younger generation. The ritual and ceremony symbolism behind torches alone would be an entire Rogue program. There was also a lot of imagery of traditional things in the world in an altered state, or one could say has been corrupted or destroyed. Not to go out on a limb, but symbolism who could be intended to portray one era ending and another beginning. What that is, who knows? It's coded speech and alignment with hidden beliefs and rituals of the world's elites. I'll go there. It's under the silver. It's why Under the Silver Lake is so important as a primer to get your head around how these beliefs work in our contemporary world. I said some time ago, one of the things I've struggled with in my own analysis since the 90s was timing. Many things the world's elites are attempting could have been done in the 90s, if not the latter half of the 1980s, yet they didn't do it. The why always perplexed me until the last few years. My belief being they couldn't, according to the calendars and the rituals they follow. Loosely said, the time wasn't right and they weren't allowed based on what they believe. Gilbert Nowak, 2050, we turn California into a state park. Chan Thomas, Gobekli Tepe, and the World Economic Forum. Chan was the author of the book, The Adam and Eve Story. We posted a link on Discord.
Yep. Crazy.
To a location where listeners can download a PDF copy to their desktop. And I did cover this book on prior programs. Also, we're pretty sure that the copy we posted, because for those who may be a little fuzzy, the published books in recent, like in 2000 or so, of Chan's book are missing sections or chapters that were removed. You need the one from 1963 to find that content. Now, for some of you who might be a little unfamiliar with this, just a little color, Chan was a researcher into alternative theories of history and anthropology. If you read Wikipedia or similar, they'll label him a conspiracy theorist. Depending on how defined, Chan could be considered a proponent of what is known as catastrophe theory or alternative history based on cataclysm. Loosely said, these are researchers who believe one significant catastrophe or several uprooted human civilization or civilizations eons ago, and we've been rebuilding ever since. There are some who focus solely on the events prior to and following the last ice age, for instance, and those who focus on what potentially may have been several calamities. The problem, of course, is these events are separated by thousands of years, and the historical record, if it exists at all, is a mess. Chan Thomas and his book, The Adam and Eve Story, is popular in several circles because of the particular fact around its printing. Its original printing was in 1963, and following a debriefing at the CIA headquarters, the government bought up all the copies. The first important item around that is the government has bought up all the copies of books before, especially in the 1990s and the 2000s. However, those books dealt with disclosures around intelligence matters or military operations the government didn't want exposed. Heck, Tom Clancy continually upset the government with the accuracy of his book's descriptions of tradecraft and weapon systems. The government buying books to remove them from the public does have precedent even prior to the 1960s, so that alone shouldn't get people worked up. However, the second takeaway is this book, to my knowledge, was the only case of the government buying up a theoretical work around ancient history, planetary change, and anthropology. That aspect has always raised eyebrows, and I never even knew about his book until going back to the 1990s when I was working my way through various dial-up bulletin boards. Further, Chan's work did not just put forward the idea of a single catastrophic event, but many. That also put him in a rather unique category. By today's standards, Chan's work is just another book sitting next to Graham Hancock and many other. Chan's book from the 60s does cite quite a few researchers, but many are names of researchers who, even for those of us who know this topic matter, are unfamiliar or have only vaguely heard of them. Also, as you read Chan's book, a lot of the content does not align exactly with Graham Hancock, but is actually closer to Randall Carlson. Particularly, descriptions of the immense earth-changing forces are almost a one-to-one with his work. The thing is, Chan's predictions predated them all by 30 to 40 years. To oversimplify, Chan Thomas references to Adam and Eve are an allegory to survivors of a cataclysm starting over. For instance, when God tells Cain he's going to banish him after killing his brother, Cain says the others will kill me. That has always confused biblical scholars. Who will kill Cain? He's a child of Adam and Eve. He's all there is. Chan's telling of that story is more in line with theories by several alternative ancient history researchers. Speaking academically as well, future researchers were denied access to his work that could have aided their own. Recently, I was rereading sections of the book, and I was struck by how similar many of his theories were to the work of Mark Carlotto. I had an entire program on Rogue about Mark's book Before Atlantis, who was published in 2018, including a PowerPoint presentation as part of that program. His theory is that the Earth's regular pole shifts cause violent plate tectonic shifts resulting in catastrophic Earth changes. What was unique in Mark's work was he found many ancient sites around the world have doorways aimed at prior locations of magnetic north over tens of thousands of years. Mark's background is in GIS and satellite mapping, and it's not like the guy is purely an amateur. While rereading sections of Chan's book, I was left with the memory of an old rumor from bulletin boards of the 1990s, a rather concerning old rumor. The CIA didn't buy up copies of the book because Chan solely had discovered some catastrophic scientific finding. That's too easy. They bought up the book because he was close enough people could start conducting their own research and putting the pieces together. Putting those pieces together in the early 1960s, not the later 1990s, when that type of content started coming out again. I'm fond of pointing out that whether you love him or hate him, Graham Hancock, and for that matter, the godfather himself of this kind of content, Eric von Daniken, have both acknowledged their mistakes in their work over the years. Now, note what I said about Donald and iterative processes. Researchers in the alternative history and archaeology field often have admitted their mistakes and theories and corrected them. Why? Well, because the researchers and their learning is an iterative process. The CIA, you could argue, wanted to disrupt that process before too many people read the book. Also, before anyone calls BS on the history of this relative to the CIA's own website acknowledges they bought up the books in the 60s. The topic does not end there, though. A relevant sidebar is on today's program is the chatter in internet circles that the World Economic Forum, the WEF, has a vested interest in places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and Gunung Padang in Indonesia. The narrative being that the WEF has invested in the archaeological work at both sites and has frozen any further research until further notice. There are only a few folks raising this topic on Twitter, aka X, and how serious the WEF is on that position is anyone's guess. Again, though, what's the problem? Well, for starters, recall all the anger and reaction Graham Hancock received when none other than Netflix gave him a forum for his own multi-part program called Ancient Apocalypse. In my opinion, because now his controversial theories that he's been writing about since the 90s had high-definition color and audio as he traipsed around the globe chatting about his beliefs. Who are the two sites that Graham Hancock talks about as much as Giorgio Tsoukalos of Ancient Aliens fame discusses Puma Punku? Hancock is always talking about Göbekli Tepe and Gunung Padang. When the History Channel first had researchers kicking up dust at Göbekli Tepe in the 90s, I remember the moment they said out loud, "Hey, we think this site is older than 10,000 years ago." I remember looking at a family member and saying, "Oh God, I feel a disturbance in the force powerfully coming from the Smithsonian, among others." My reasoning being that no PhD worth their salt ever allows any discussion of civilizations older than 10,000 years. Say it with me. Because we all know that civilization started exactly on this date in the Indus Valley in ancient Sumeria, and you're a conspiracy theorist if you say different. Yet right there on a major network, people with their own PhDs were saying that they had rock strata and carbon data showing an age of at least 12,000 years, if not longer. Even more important, the site was intentionally buried after generations of use by whomever built it. Why hide it, one would ask? Or was it in fact an act of preservation? Then we have Gunung Padang in Indonesia, who Graham and others would not shut up about. Okay, Veles, where are you going with this? Well, there's two bombshells with this. In the last 2 years, there were major discoveries at both sites indicating they're far older than what we thought. And in the case of Göbekli Tepe, are important messages about these catastrophes when they occur. In Turkey, the sites also have the Tepe moniker in their name because Tepe in the Turkish language means hill. Now, there are roughly 12 of the sites in Turkey. We know of Göbekli Tepe, but it's one of 12 with these T-shaped lintels. And some of them include Kilisik Tepe, Navali Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, Tassel Tepe, Sefer Tepe, Karahan Tepe, who you may have heard of because they've started digging into that one, Hamzan Tepe, Urfa Tepe, Harbet Sivan Tepe, and others. And as I mentioned, only Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe have been explored in any serious way. What did they recently find at Karahan Tepe? Well, it's older than Göbekli Tepe, and that didn't go over well either. Gunung Padang has a lot with it as well, and the biggest being they discovered cavities below the site, indicating it is at a minimum 40,000 years old. Then suddenly the World Economic Forum got involved, and if the stories are true, has stopped all further digs at those sites, or at least research specifically confirming the date of origin. So back to Chan Thomas and the Adam and Eve story, among so many other books. What's another item in the book who no doubt raised concern? He felt that we were due for another event, and remember, he was saying this in the 1960s. As a result, in contemporary time, when we have criticism of Graham Hancock and loud voices saying he should never again be allowed to have documentary or similar program on Netflix, that's one thing, particularly when that program was still produced. But when powerful non-governmental organizations like the WEF are shutting down entirely or at least severely curtailing research at sites like this, they must have a reason, and things get a lot scarier. It means they've known far more about those sites than the public knows, more specifically about the ancient past and this planet. Equally begging the question how they discovered this, or even more importantly, did someone tell them, and if so, who and why? One final comment about Chan's work. In his book, he delves into what scientists were telling him in the 1960s about how humans react to gravitational change. And as you might be aware, and we brought it up on other programs, the movement of our magnetic north and why we're suddenly having aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere in the summer. Loosely said, the effect on the human body of gravitational change is it tends to cause morality to go out the window and violence tends to spike. Not that anything like that's been going on the last few years. But don't worry, per a Daily Mail article I posted to Discord, the Smithsonian published a paper in Bioscience magazine advocating for a cryo vault on the moon containing preserved biological samples of animals on Earth. Basically, the sea vault in Svalbard, Iceland on steroids. Patrick Ryan. Patrick continues to do his thing on various websites. Of course, a lot of his input is very specific to his followers' questions on Patrick's biggest current use of the focus of AI. More specifically, how to leverage artificial intelligence to protect yourself, including building your own bot armies, because the ocean of disinformation headed towards us is immense. He posted the following recently, and I felt it was worth sharing. So I'm quoting directly now. I'm building a World Economic Forum simulator. In this future, everyone has universal basic income, everyone lives on a pod, everyone is eating bugs, and everyone has their own personalized reality tunnel fed directly to their neurochips. As a result, the cities are drab, constructed by cheap robots who are basically Minecraft bots. But humans in the cities don't see that because the neurochips plug into their visual cortex and it overlays whatever beautiful thing they want to see. Do you want the city to look like a Japanese garden? Subscribe to the overlay and you'll see a Japanese garden. As a fixer, your job is to hack devices and use human intelligence, deception, and leverage rumors to undermine people that make up corporations, gangs, and political factions. Right now, I've got the targeting criteria engine completed. Game entities belong in a hierarchy or a metagroup called devices, who contains computers, switches, and machines, and they can be targeted by that hierarchy. Then there's criteria, which determines if the entity gets targeted with an effect. The economy is very complex. I literally track business cycles and investment patterns the elite do as business cycles shift. I also simulate when a central bank injects more or less universal basic income and when they hire other fixers to perform antitrust operations on colluding groups. I can simulate close to 1 million non-playing characters in under 20 megabits of RAM, and I'll be plugging in an LLM, a large language model, so that the NPCs, non-playing characters, can actually talk. Local LLM that doesn't blow out resources or reach out to the internet. It's a very ambitious project, unquote. As I'm fond of saying, there's a lot to unpack there. What Patrick is saying is either he's joking or he's seriously building a video game simulation who basically mimics what the World Economic Forum is claiming they want to build. The first thing with that is you better believe NGOs like the WEF have already literally done that very same thing, built an artificial intelligence simulator. Why would they do that? Well, recall what I said earlier about running tests and simulations, because they need to simulate how to impose a global model to make sure it works. If you'll recall prior globalist efforts like the year 1848, the post-World War I world, the post-World War II world of Bretton Woods, and the list goes on, things don't always turn out the way they wanted. Now they're trying to simulate it. So what Patrick Ryan is really saying is he's built a model how to study how to break their model. Now, my friends, that's some serious asynchronous warfare right there. Recall Patrick's personal war against Hollywood and the fact that he won that war. He's a guy who loves to model how to defeat more powerful adversaries. It's one of the reasons why, in my days working with Washington, D.C. think tanks, we would have paid Patrick a lot of money because I've met people like him before, and they are invaluable. Case in point, this is why, in my opinion, he began teaching and or providing guidance to those who follow him on how to build their own electronic weapons via bots, personal artificial intelligence related. Once he helped them build those resources, he then built this simulator so that they can fine-tune the tools that they've built. Very wax on, wax off, if you will. For you non-video game fans, the NPC reference are non-playing characters who are in the background of certain video games. Depending on the game, you can interact with them, and they are at times important. Recall what I said about Kanye West's video game last week. One of the NPCs just parroted what you said unless you said the magic phrase. That phrase being, "I'm seeking ascension." These NPCs have a history who goes back to role-playing games with dice like Dungeons & Dragons. There were characters in the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns who were either just drones in the background or had secret significance, but if you didn't interact with them in the right way, they wouldn't reveal a thing. The dynamic evolved into video games as it was a useful part of the game, whether you played with dice or a computer. By the way, this is just a small snippet of the reasoning of why Tom Luongo is so fixated on multi-user games and how they operate. This brings us to Patrick's reference to LLM, or large language models. That's a term that's very in vogue these days in artificial intelligence. It's a computational model whose importance is its ability to achieve general spoken language generation and other natural language interactions. If you're a help desk worker, or more specifically an entry-level one, you don't like LLM because all the tasks of your job in helping someone over the phone or via text exchanges can now be performed by software, meaning you're out of a job. These tools have the ability to determine context and the use of words, making them a massive improvement over early AI interactive software. Therefore, to be blunt, LLM and whatever else they have coming out of the lab will make it harder and harder to know if you're hearing or interacting with a person or software. That makes everything from manipulation to deep fakes even more challenging. It's why Patrick's been weaponizing his audience on ways to battle that and detect it. And a word of pause before I move on. I've worked off and on in the IT industry for 30 years, and the stuff Patrick and his folks are doing, I get it. I understand it on a certain level, but even I would have to onboard for months of effort to understand the complexity of these systems and what they're doing. Plus, there's a lot of natural talent with the folks he works with because I've read some of their posts, and these folks know what they're doing. Their ability to conceptualize things creates a natural reaction in me to say things like what I said earlier, which is, if I was still a consultant to government, I'd be paying some of these folks $400 grand a year just to access that brain power. So does this mean the vast majority of you in the audience are hosed? No, it just means we need to keep an eye on this topic and what people like Patrick are doing for the time when they eventually roll out something that we can learn to leverage and use. Charles Manson, MK Ultra, and new findings. Covert Action magazine ran a piece on the U.S. intelligence community and Charles Manson last spring, who's germane to my MKUltra coverage, who follows in a moment. An author named Tom O'Neill has published a book in 2019 called Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. The book is the primary source for the article, and Tom O'Neill spent 20 years of research to put the book together. In the tumult of the 60s between wars in Asia and the situation in the U.S., Manson and his family killed a number of people. For those of you who saw the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Sharon Tate's murder was recast as being prevented. If you've ever read any of the details of what happened when she and her guests were killed, you can understand why Tarantino was so violently killed the attackers in the movie. Beyond those killings, Manson's followers also killed a guy named Gary Hinman in what was known as the La Bianca murders, the latter being a food industry executive and his wife, who were murdered following the Sharon Tate killings. One of the reasons why O'Neill needed 20 years to complete his book was something with which I can identify. Every time he felt he had enough data to go forward with his book, he would find another source, another witness, another cryptic connection, causing him to tell his publisher he had to delay publishing the book and providing his manuscript. O'Neill interviewed hundreds of people, including law enforcement, lawyers, various people connected to those killings, Hollywood personalities, and also, interestingly enough, drug dealers. Discoveries by O'Neill included the involvement of Dr. Louis Jolin West of the CIA's MKUltra program, then another CIA figure known as Reeve Whitson, who was also a CIA agent operating undercover and disguised as a hippie. By the way, folks, that's a domestic operation by the CIA who's illegal, but I digress. Dr. West from the book I'll cover today, Poisoner in Chief, had this detail on him. West ran one of the sub-projects under MKUltra known as Subproject 43, who was focused on suggestibility and dissociative states. I'll explain the sub-project piece a little later. For several years, West operated a clinic in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco where he gave LSD to volunteers and monitored their progress. Dr. West was later the chairman of UCLA's psychiatry department. He later got into some hot water for setting up a center in California at a former missile silo complex to study interpersonal relationships and violence among minorities via electrodes and drugs made to make them violent. It's believed Dr. West was Manson's drug provider for LSD. One of the things said about O'Neill's work on Manson and MKUltra is his warning, there's still so much we don't know. He cautions against anyone saying they have the definitive single interpretation of what happened. Equally, he was very transparent about his own descent into the subject matter and the degree to which governments may be orchestrating far more socially than most could believe or want to admit is occurring. That certainly resonates with me if you've heard my take on the JFK assassination or similar historical events. You need the body of material and a multitude of books and other people's analysis, not just one source of material. Charles Manson, even before he put the family together up in the mountains of California, was already on federal parole. The question O'Neill asks frequently is how Manson could have committed so many crimes prior to the murders and not be sent back to prison, especially given the fact someone kept interfering in any attempt to prosecute Manson prior to the murders. Not to mention the fact that the average parole officer manages anywhere from 20 to 100 people. But not Manson. He had a parole officer for whom Manson was his only responsibility, a guy named Roger Smith. The book also calls into question the theories and prosecution of Manson by the famous prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi. O'Neill has a whole chapter dedicated to that criticism. An interesting takeaway as well is Manson was always under surveillance by intelligence agencies and federal and local law enforcement. Yet all those murders took place and the investigations into him and his followers seemed to take considerable time. A factor goes to the question about who was protecting Manson. A sidebar to that is equally important as another group of folks were being protected as well. A group of people who were rarely, if ever, questioned about Manson and those crimes. That being the drug dealers who were providing Manson and others their drugs and especially LSD. As we'll discuss in a moment, LSD supply was almost entirely being provided by the CIA to the entire counterculture community. One of the primary conclusions of the book is that Charles Manson was a resource of the intelligence community. Whether Manson knew that or not is another matter. To paraphrase the spy novelist John le Carre, the best agent is the one who remains undetected. The belief from O'Neill's work is Manson was a creation to cause bloody violence for which there could be a response a response via the FBI's COINTELPRO program or the CIA's Chaos program. Manson was simply in the orbit of too many folks from the CIA and too much circumstantial evidence for the history of him to just be coincidence. The other thing about that topic and what I just provided also is of all the interviews I've seen with Manson, and a number of them are kind of hard to watch because he's so unglued. But there was an interview with Charlie Manson where the interviewer asked him, "But who are you?" And his facial expression, his body language took on a very, very weird kind of appearance, almost childlike. And he looked at the interviewer and said, "I'm nobody, man. I'm nobody." And that's very striking because he was just a vessel through which things could be achieved. So MK Ultra, bit of a disclaimer on this topic. I've got a number of books relating to MK Ultra, mind control, synthetic control through cyber resources and related. And for everything I've read, I'm still very much a neophyte on this topic, and new data is always coming out. So one of the things I was trying to accomplish today, beyond the piece I just covered, was to share the relevance of two other books. The first is Mind Wars by Marie Jones and Larry Flaxman, published in 2015. It's a moderately sized book. It walks you through the early history of influence from ancient religions to modern programs and the CIA. And I'll cover that in a little bit more detail. The second book is Poisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control by Stephen Kinzer, that came out in 2019. Kinzer has published a number of books on global subject matter, including a book on the Dulles brothers, John Foster and Alan Dulles, the U.S. relationship with Iran and Turkey, the Shah of Iran, various U.S. regime change operations. And then there's a third book I won't be able to get to today. I will try to get to it on a future program. And that book is Thanks for the Memories, The Truth Has Set Me Free by Bryce Taylor, whose real name is Susan Ford. And it was first published in 1999 and had a fifth printing in 2022. That book is in the same vein as the book Compromised. And by that, I mean, it's very hard to get a copy of it. The book also is kind of unusual. It's like 8 by 10. It's a big book. There's a lot in that one, and we'll have to get to that on another program. So let's dig into Mind Wars. Their book focused on various forms of mind control or social influence as exercised by governments, media, and secret societies. In the case of governments, they speak to practices that go all the way back to ancient civilizations, and the book explores the use of the term brainwashing coming into popular culture in the 50s through a reporter who was actually on the payroll of the CIA, no doubt under Operation Mockingbird. The basic approach of any kind of manipulation is to change a person's locus of control away from them to someone else. This can be everything from an abusive relationship to the government to the entertainment industry. It's centered on 4 tactics to influence a person through behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. You'll note on a number of Rogue segments I've covered, especially the last few years, attempts to inflame people of every political persuasion, to get them angry and make them act out. Please see what was anticipated to occur after Charlie Manson's killings. Western media has played a strong role in shaping people's minds on the subject through a variety of books, movies, and television programs. The book Mind Wars lists 40 examples of books and programming through television and through movies that has heavily influenced what the public perceives or believes it understands on this topic. Speaking to ancient societies to contemporary time, the book covers ancient rituals, religious practices, and the need that was driven into people to obey divine authority. It also provides a high-level overview of MK Ultra, including connections to Operation Paperclip, who was used to spirit out of Nazi Germany scientists to develop these techniques to be continued by the CIA. This is one of the few books I've read who includes the level of MK Ultra introduction based on the desired function of a person. This is often associated with a secondary personality who carries out these actions. And so there's this tiering system. The first level is called alpha, which is just a person who has a moderate control structure embedded into them. Then you have betas. or beta training, which reduces any hesitancy to any form of sex, including pedophilia, through conditioning. Then you have deltas or delta training, which is used to develop people who can assassinate someone. And then according to the literature that was used in Mind Wars, they had something they called thetas. Thetas are supposedly individuals who have either psychic abilities or can kill people psychically. Think of George Clooney in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. Then omegas, or omega conditioning. This is an embedded series of instructions to make the individual kill themselves if they're compromised or if they recall their other personality and try and discuss or disclose that information. I'll also point out that the book Mind Wars was a source long before the recent documentary about Ted Kaczynski that was on Netflix. This book was one of the first I ever read, indicating Kaczynski was in fact an MK Ultra subject. It's a good book if you need a primer to get yourself grounded on the many elements of the subject, including things like methods used, what potential capabilities could be created by such programs, and the role of modern media in perpetuating these things. Then the big one, Poisoner in Chief by Kinzer. It's a deep dive into MK Ultra history, including how programs like Bluebird became Artichoke, and Artichoke became the large MK Ultra program with many projects under it. At ground zero was a very unassuming guy who lived on a farm in Virginia and grew all natural foods, who came to lead the MK Ultra program, and that man was Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb is the godfather of all mind control program planning for decades in the United States, who had a godlike power within that department throughout its known life, a power that was given to him by Allen Dulles at the CIA because Dulles strongly believed in leaving no stone unturned to find all the various potential uses of mind control. The book is very well researched and extensively footnoted. Cannabis, heroin, LSD, among others, via microdoses up to massive doses, often killing the person they were experimenting on. The problem with that is we know from experiments conducted worldwide, these approaches would not take place if there was nothing to it. This begs the question, if true, then why, purely for operational reasons, would they not shut the program down? Each program has literally dozens of sub-projects burning up huge amounts of money. On top of that, if anything ever went sideways, the CIA calls the FBI to stop people from investigating anything to avoid revelations about these programs. Per the book, if necessary, they used military assets on U.S. soil along with the CIA to shut down anyone asking too many questions. Based on that, you can threaten local law enforcement and prosecutors all you want, but eventually they're going to push back. They'll want promotion or money or whatever. What tends to happen as well is they want those same federal assets to help them clean up their local problems if things went sideways on their watch. This is a full-time effort, therefore, with a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of planning and life cycle management for decades to keep these programs functioning, also to keep all those local officials happy. And then beyond the official, and I use the word loosely, CIA-sponsored programs like MK Ultra and its subsequent efforts like MK Delta, there are others not often associated with these efforts. They are no doubt part of it, but the connection of proof of connection is very hard to find. Case in point, L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and even things like NXIVM years later. Then we have to consider the immense blackmail programs via everything from Hollywood to government to what we know about the Franklin scandal, all designed to keep these programs quiet and discredit anyone asking too many questions. On prior Rogue programs, I've explained the difference between program management versus project management. You manage work for a specific goal or outcome in a timed fashion in a project, and groups of projects are managed under a program. You can also have programs who are managed similarly under a master program. There's also an aspect of mind control story I believe is missing who relates to that dynamic. According to the book, MK Ultra had nearly 150 projects under the MK Ultra program, and these individual projects use numerical identifiers to help conceal the project's purpose. The program was MK Ultra and later MK Delta, and then a series of sub-projects under the main program. The challenge for me is there are so many other activities who look and feel like they had some kind of connection to MK Ultra, yet surviving evidence proving that is limited. Plus, a lot of documentation from these programs and projects was destroyed or filed away in secure locations. Therefore, I can only draw one conclusion from my own personal work managing large projects and large programs for corporations and federal agencies. It's my opinion that MK Ultra may have actually been a program operating underneath a much larger program. That parent program not only managed MK Ultra and Delta, but later fostered Scientology, Hollywood media programs, press control under Mockingbird, and on and on. God only knows what that master program's name may have been or how many subprograms or projects may have been under it. Prior to the launch of World War II, the United States was far more involved in developing what we would call today, or in contemporary time, programs trying to achieve mind control. Or said another way, programs designed to influence individuals from levels of low to high, with eventual goal being creating individuals who operated almost nearly like a machine. When the war ended, the United States brought over, under Operation Paperclip, top Nazi scientists already working on these programs in Germany. The U.S. already knew who the top German researchers were prior to the war and gave their shopping list to the U.S. Army and the State Department for approval to get them out of Germany and bring them to the United States. This created a merging of existing U.S. programs with what the Germans had developed. The Soviet Union captured a lot of records, but few of the top minds in these programs. The fact the U.S. knew about what the U.S. had already developed, and now the work of Germany, the concern was the Soviet Union must be accelerating their own efforts. This fear was one of the many primary drivers for people like Dr. Gottlieb to receive so much funding and support when MK Ultra brought prior projects all under one roof. As mentioned previously, there were nearly 150 projects operating under MK Ultra over its known, keyword, history. These projects spread out to leverage experiments in the U.S. and globally. In the U.S., they were conducted in poverty-stricken areas and the people in them, prisons, hospitals, the disabled, children, and universities. Globally, they operated in France, Canada, Asia, and back in Germany. It was rather interesting in the book. It articulated all these different centers and locations in Germany where Nazi scientists had been conducting this work. We bring them over to the United States, and then the Germans tell us, well, most of our records and our equipment and stuff is still back in Germany at those locations. So the MK Ultra people pick up the Germans and take them right back and move them into Germany. And they just pick up where they left off and keep conducting these experiments in Germany. It's worth noting the Canadian government through the 1970s and onward conducted several investigations into these programs. My take being not so much because the work was undertaken, but because U.S. intelligence was operating extensively on Canadian soil and few in Canada knew about it. An important consideration about MK Ultra was their work didn't just focus on mind control and various drugs and methods to accomplish that. The work was focused on unique poisons as well as mind control. Correlation is because the MK Ultra work in mind-bending drugs like LSD had led them in other areas. It enabled them to delve into various substances who were so powerful just a small dose could kill. Their expertise in this area grew because of several assassination attempts by the United States were via poisons that the group had produced, and the group had also been able to transport it near the target, which won the praise of the CIA. That, and also because the MK Ultra folks became very good at miniaturization. Soviet scientists who came into contact with any of these poisons and tried to study them in the 1960s were often perplexed by what they found. They knew obviously it would kill someone, but it took them a very long time to understand how MK Ultra and the CIA created them. It was also during the establishment of MK Ultra into the singular program whose umbrella contained the subprojects, a defensive structure was established. From the FBI to the CIA to the State Department, the list goes on, various federal agencies were used to silence anyone asking too many questions. That came in handy during the famous historical episode concerning Dr. Frank Olson, who leapt or was pushed out of a hotel window in New York. I know many of you have heard about Olson, and there's been a number of documentaries and so on about him. A couple of clarifying things from the book. The MK Ultra folks were literally killing people in these experiments. They had cleaners, quote unquote, whose job was to dispose of bodies and make sure no one found out about the experiments. Case in point, they would have a person in prison or captured in a foreign country, and their loyalties were uncertain. The MK Ultra folks would use them like guinea pigs to try out various drugs to get them to talk. Usually the person died. Frank Olson was known to have witnessed these interrogations, especially overseas and in particular Germany. He literally witnessed people die under these interrogations. It was not a one-time thing either. As a result, when the official narrative says, well, Olson became disaffected by what he saw, that's a complicated statement. He was involved in those activities for a very long time. Now, did it wear on him? Who knows? But as I said, it's not like there was a one-time episode and he walked away from it saying, whoa, this is too heavy, I got to get out of it. He was involved in a ton of that stuff. Gottlieb had a habit of even dosing his own people without their knowledge with LSD, and not just intended subjects. He experimented on the most intellectual down to people with disabilities. He also tested LSD on Olson several times. It appears Olson didn't take well to the drug, and it led to his being seen as a security risk and needing to be eliminated. Olson wasn't the only one. The book covers in detail how Fort Detrick came to be and why the research there expanded beyond belief. Further, it outlines how over the years of the Cold War, how various events in the Soviet Union were used to justify ever-expanding programs to finding various desired abilities. They wanted to know how to subtly influence people without their knowledge, down to breaking someone quickly during interrogation, to design ways to influence people individually and in large groups, if not entire masses of people globally. It often relied on drugs and electrical stimulation, but delved into a few more subtle methods. It also included various exotic poisons being developed, as mentioned earlier. Large-scale bioagent releases in major cities in New York to San Francisco are reviewed, including why, how these were covered up, and the follow-on projects that were created from those experiments. I would not say poisoned, but they made a lot of people sick in New York and San Francisco by releasing various like flu agents and so on to see how long it took, how many people were affected, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Gottlieb could not have pulled this off without high-level support, and he had it in the form of Allen Dulles as the director of plans for CIA. Dulles was a huge supporter of these programs. This would also be a good time to recall a Rogue program I had recently about the new book identifying who the famous Soviet mole was in the CIA that was driving the agency leadership nuts because they could never find the mole. That mole would have had access to what the CIA was working on with MK-Ultra and would have logically fed that all back to the Soviet Union. Just food for thought. Another interesting takeaway is the famous magician John Mulholland. Mulholland was a mentee of Harry Houdini and developed a library on magic and illusions so vast that when Mulholland died, David Copperfield bought it. Mulholland was secretly hired by the CIA and supported MK-Ultra by devising various sleight of hand and other magician-like methods to distract people. The purpose was to enable an agent to dose someone via something in their hand, their drink, their food, whatever, to create the desired outcome. This also included a variety of poisons. If you ever saw the movie Mulholland Drive, its a storyline is vague and filled with illusions. After reading the book, I wondered if the movie was just another example of something like Under the Silver Lake, with a series of hidden messages about MK-Ultra. Lastly, the MK-Ultra completely dominated the best universities of the United States, and particularly during the culture wars of the 1960s, both via students and graduate students conducting experiments on their fellow students and the massive distribution of narcotics across America's schools, going so far as to test whether they could literally shape a generation of individuals at the university level before they became part of professional society. To oversimplify, my concluding thoughts on the topic in the book are these. First, if it was not for the massive eugenics programs operated by high net worth individuals led by their ringleader of Rockefeller, all the pre-World War II work in the U.S. in mind control experimentation might never have occurred. It occurred because those who advocated eugenics, and we know them today as advocates of technocracy, were always searching for better ways to control the wide span of humanity, or dare one say it out loud, the individuals they felt that were beneath them. Second, the book frequently discusses how nearly every sub-project under the MK-Ultra failed. How every use of every drug usually resulted in failure, other than people dying. How the MK-Ultra program was a perfect storm of an idealistic leader, Gottlieb, funded by an intelligence agency, yet once again out of control in the role of the CIA. And this stuff went on for years due to a lack of bureaucratic oversight. There are frequent references in the book to various CIA officials whose personal backgrounds indicated that they were not exactly known for their restraint in doing bad things, but yet even they were confronting MK-Ultra leadership asking for results, as though everyone knew these projects and the program were complete failures, but just couldn't whistleblower it the right way to bring it under control. I'll give the author the benefit of the doubt that these are truly his conclusions, rather than a cautious voice in the back of my mind warning the book is a form of disinformation. Now, some of you might raise an eyebrow at that, but just bear with me. The book is an excellent in-depth read on Gottlieb, the people around him, and the history of the program, and many little-known details. And in that regard, it's very important. However, at its core, it puts forward the argument nothing effective came out of this research. As someone who used to spend billions of the government's money on research and development, which I did, if I have a program like this, you're eventually going to have to produce something. In the life I used to live, they may have given us a wide latitude when it came to research, or more time to find certain solutions of the things that we were working on. And it's government, so things tend to move rather slowly. But in the end, when you spend big government dollars on something, you need to have something to show for it. My colleagues and I were always held accountable for what did the government receive for its money. It may have been a long time, but they eventually showed up and said, okay, standing in an aircraft hangar, what do you have for us? We can joke about over-budgeted F-35s and aircraft carriers who leak water, but the government usually gets something. These guys spent money for the era that was a lot of money, and they tied up massive levels of intelligence and law enforcement to cover up their work. Bureaucratic pork and incompetence over decades does not explain how this much failure was justified. No. When Stanford University teaches courses to IT executives today in real time on mental manipulation through cyber media, you better believe MK Ultra and others created working products. Never mind the 1993 admission that the Soviet Union had over 100 deep cover agents in the United States during the Cold War to conduct sabotage, and individuals who believed they were the Americans they had been brainwashed to assume those identities. Even better was the disclosure in 1993 that the U.S. already knew who the Soviet agents were. One has to ask, because we had our own programs, and so identifying the Soviet agents made it even more possible. When I review Bryce Taylor's book on a future program, we'll delve a bit more into the actual field use of people developed under these programs. In her case, claiming she was a human recorder of information working under handlers who were none other than Bob Hope and Henry Kissinger, among others. With that, V, I yield the floor.
Very well said. Hold on one sec. Okay, there you go. Very well said, Veles. Excellent show today. And folks, I want to thank all you guys for joining in. Veles covered a lot of ground, and as with every Veles program, I recommend that you go back and listen to it a second, a third, a fourth time, because it's just a really good intelligence drop. And so with that being said, folks, thank you all for listening in. We'll be back on Monday. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy your weekends.